we met at Jason's event, the Jason and my event, and he told me ahead of the night that he's like, you got to meet today. Like that was what he told me, like right as we got there. He's like, I'll make sure I introduce you guys. And then it sort of got busy. There was a lot of people there and stuff, and then you came right over afterwards to me, and as soon as you started talking to me, I'm like, I bet this is the day.
I didn't even know he mentioned that. That's funny. Yeah. That was a cool event. It was really cool. And I'm always here to support Jason and all his amazing work. So,
How did you guys
that
meet?
oh man. We met through a friend of ours that we both mutually had. And then she was like, "Oh, you've got to meet Jason. Like he does a lot of the support of like abolitionist stuff." That was like, I want to say 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
And then that we've just been really good friends and I've just always supported him. He's always supported me. Yeah, and I think that's how we met. And then he had like a New York fashion show thing for Humanize My Hoodie in New
Yep.
York.
Did you go to
Um,
that?
yeah, I did, and it was so great. I was pregnant with my daughter. I had a big old belly, and I was trotting along, and I was recording it. It was really fun. And it's just so awesome to see him do what he loves and like be in the moment. And
Yeah.
like someone so powerful and compassionate, and just very intentional about the movement is
Yep.
like very rare nowadays. So yeah, it was really cool. So it's
That's
just
what
been.
drew me in. When Jason and I just did an event in New York, I guess it was in the fall. We did something at People's Forum, which
Mm.
was really cool because I have a clientele. I lived out there for 13 years, so we got to kind of do that together. Some of my clients came, and he brought a bunch of people in too, so it was cool. But yeah, it that was I had read something about him, and I kind of like bookmarked the interview, and I was like, I want to meet this guy somehow. But you just don't know how. And then I think
Uh,
I started following him on something, and then there's a woman, Christine, who does some volunteer work with him. I think she started with Humanize. So she was wearing a hoodie. She came in for a treatment with me, and
oh
I was
yeah,
like,
I got it.
oh
Got
yeah,
one on.
there you go, there you go.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you know Jason? And she's like, yeah, I work with him all the time. So she
Oh,
introduced us. And then the first, we did a podcast together, like this probably 2020 or 2021. And I was just so impressed by how he really was not looking for attention. Like if anything, he was deflecting, and he was just like, certain things I can't be bothered with because I have so many details that I have to be keeping up with, plus teaching, and all the stuff. So I was pretty impressed. And then we just kind of kept, having conversations. He came in and saw me for treatment, and we just started talking about things we wanted to do together. So it's been such a like I feel like so inspired every day by little things that I see him have going on. I'm just like watching and like, okay, I can do more. And I felt the same way meeting you. Part of where I kind of got to, and with my journey into like the abolition work, was it really kind of started. I didn't realize it, but it had started kind of when I was in New York, kind of figuring out what communities, my community needed. That's part of the reason I got into doing work with babies, and doing a lot of pre and postnatal work.
yeah.
So that was just nothing I really planned on in my career.
Yeah.
But I'm so happy that I get to work with people at all these different levels with their families, and even transitionally. Like I have families here in Minneapolis now who, I'm working with the grandparents, the parents, caregivers, the babies. Like I know exactly what's going on in that family, and I know when there's a challenge going on, it's really easy to sort of help. So, and I think you enter in at this point, but what's your background, and what's your story into kind of getting involved in the work?
Yeah, so I was always like an advocate for families and like being low income and having to take care of themselves, but it really kind of jump started when I got pregnant.
Okay.
And I was needing support and I was needing help and full holistic like care. And I experienced like some weird energy from like the hospital route when I was pregnant.
Yep.
I also like got a lot of like embarrassment and shame when I was asking for help through the county when I was pregnant, like having
Mm,
economic assistance and stuff. And I was just thinking, going through these experiences, I'm like, where's the real holistic care?
yeah.
Like, where is the care for, Black and brown individuals primarily to feel like they're being heard and their concerns and their pains are being actually listened to?
Yeah.
And so after I was going through these experiences, I'm like, you know what? When I'm done having this baby, I'm going to make my own systems of care for us. And it's going to be holistic, it's going to be intentional, and most importantly, it's going to be non-invasive.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the time, invasive measures for families who need care does more harm than good. Some humiliation that goes into it. And, part of the abolition movement, like, I don't feel like people need to explain themselves when they're seeking support.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unless they want to by choice, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just feeling all of these feelings, and I'm like, I'm just gonna make my own systems. I'm gonna do my own things, and it's just gonna come with a different holistic approach. And I'm not a doctor. I can't essentially like do a lot of birth working things, but I
Yeah.
can be an advocate, and I can provide services and support for families that are going through the experiences and need additional, like, assistance.
Yeah.
I need a village too, like, to
We
feel
all do.
comfortable and safe, right? To support themselves while they're carrying life.
Right.
So that's kind of how I got into it. And then, there were tragic murders going around, from, state sanctioned murders.
Yeah.
And with that impacted a lot of families locally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so when the families were being impacted, like, there were mothers who were like, I can't even go to the pharmacy for my daughter's medication. This
Yeah.
one mother was like, my daughter's all the way in Mankato. She needs a ride. I need to get my daughter, right? Like, she couldn't get her because she didn't have a car. Everything in the Twin Cities area was shut down due to the rebellion. This is another example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of these needs were being needed to be met for families, for mothers, for caregivers. And so I'm looking at these needs and I'm like, where's the services?
Yeah.
Where's the support?
Yeah.
So I just made my own. I literally got together with other community members and we were like, let's coordinate rides. Let's coordinate drop-offs. Let's get her to her pharmacy. Let's just do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And from then it kind of just continued on. We just kept supporting mothers and caregivers. We kept supporting babies. We kept supporting families. And now we're trying to move in a direction where things are a little bit more. I don't want to downplay what I'm doing now, but
Right.
I do have big visions and dreams.
Tell
And
me.
we want to provide housing.
Ah.
Housing is like our end, like providing housing, and the housing creates a village for all of those who live in it,
Yeah.
knowing that they can lean on each other, knowing they can support each other. You need your baby watch, I need my baby watch. You need to get something from the grocery, I'm going anyways, I'll get it for you.
Yeah.
That's my big overall vision, is housing and a village-like community within that housing.
Yeah.
But for now, with the capacity that we have, with the funding, that we have available, we just provide economic support kind of like on a low scale,
Yeah.
holistic support, and we're hoping to add doula support, because one of our team members is a doula who was
Oh,
actually
awesome.
so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I've just been watching some of your stuff, following you on Instagram, and it's funny. I've noticed that some of my friends in New York actually follow you on Instagram, which is
Really?
crazy. Yeah.
That's
So, one who just had a baby actually.
Oh, awesome.
And so, anyways, so one of the things that I really tuned into, because I'm a child of a single parent mother, and I know what that struggle is, and I think because you were at this event, that I grew up in a in a government funded development out in New Hope Crystal area, and it was brand new when I moved in. So I mean, it was nice, as far as it's still there. I'm sure it is not nice anymore, but growing up, basically, it was like almost everybody who lived there were either single parent, and single parent kids, older veterans, disabled people, and that was kind of the makeup. And really, it's almost kind of like what you're talking about. we all just kind of figured out how to do all these kinds of things. We've one of this one kid who was one of my close friends was like 4 years older than me. He became our babysitter. And then I became a babysitter for other little kids at some point when I was a teenager. And then we had a lot of moms just kind of watching us all the time. We'd stay overnight at each other's places, in the apartment complex all the time. We kind of knew where we were. There was a courtyard in the middle, so everyone was just hanging out there all the time. And, there was a field nearby and a basketball court. So you could kind of look around and see where everything was happening. It was probably a pretty nice for the mothers. It was probably a pretty nice thing, But in those places, there's always some sketchy stuff that happens, and we had cop cars around. but for the most part, I think even within the complex, we knew where there were problems and where there, who needed to be paid attention to. But it was pretty rare, to be honest. So
right, and that's the thing is that when you have spaces like that, everyone is holding each other to accountability of protecting each other and for being aware and knowing that this is a trustworthy community. Right. And I feel like down the line, with so much surveillance and carceral violence, like we've kind of lost that because we're like stuck in our own isolation and our own survival. And I think that's another reason why I kind of do this work with the lens of abolition, because I really want like our communities to know that this can happen without the surveillance and without the reliance on the government, because we created this community, we created this city, right. We created this neighborhood, and like going to be the ones to steer it in the way of safety. And so that's why when we're talking about villages and we're talking about community and we're talking all these safe spaces and stuff, like it really takes our own personal involvement and engagement and like our own will too. Like, if you don't want to be a part of a community centered spot, like that's going to cause a lot of issues for the neighborhood that you're in, because you're not going to know what's going on, who lives there, right? Like you said. Where they can go to, get refuge or any support should anything happen. So it'll make it hard for people who don't want to have that village. But I think a lot of people don't even know that it's possible. Right. We've all been in such a survival mode of like, I have to take care of myself. I have to take care of myself. It's just me, and it's hurt us in so many ways. And I think about it, especially with like mothers and caregivers and parents, whether they're single or low income or disabled, or don't have a family that they can rely on. Right. It just causes so much damage to our youth and obviously to the parents and the caregivers that are taking care of the youth. And I feel like we can really break this cycle by saying, hey, like I'm in charge of the community I want. Like I'm a part of it. I'm in charge. And taking that power back and saying it's in our own hands to provide this safety is just so powerful. And that's why, when we're doing the work with my nonprofit Seeds Worth Sowing, I'm like, dang, we're not providing thousands of dollars to people and we're not providing housing. But I'm noticing like the little things that we're doing actually are so profound, because the families that we've cared for have came back and said, hey, I created a period or a tampon drive in my apartment complex from you guys and getting the support. And that ripple effect is just like unexplainable for me.
That is it too. I mean, and this is what I talked, when I first started, Jason was turning me on to all sorts of stuff to read. And it was one of the things that I just picked up on right away and I think because it's my nature just in general to like try to figure out how to solve a problem. Like that's all I'm really looking to do it. And a lot of it was that abolition was like a healing practice. It was basically saying like, these are the vulnerable populations that are for whatever reason not getting the kind of care and support that they need. And we have so much judgment on, oh, do they have a drug problem, or they're a young mom who got pregnant. Like that's, we don't have to get into whose fault all these things are, but I'm just saying that is the judgment that goes on in all these situations, when really we should just skip that step and just be like, all right, this person's in a bad place. How can I help?
Well, and I think, we can acknowledge it and see the support that's needed on those types of levels, because those add factors into how this person is going to need care for their situation, right?
Yeah.
I think the emphasis on it is definitely it's it's emphasized in a manner that's not actually impactful, but it should be emphasized, because then how to provide the specific support. And this is where, like the services that, like, we have this program coming up in the spring, and it's for families who are wanting to learn more alternative ways of safety and
Yeah.
care, while they're mothering or fathering or parenting through substance use or domestic violence,
Yeah.
or um, maybe they are dealing with immigration things like being undocumented.
Yeah.
So like, how do you parent in those types of environments in a safe manner so that the child feels safe and
Yeah.
they feel prioritized? Those things do need to be emphasized, but not in an exploitive, invasive kind of like, I don't know the word, but it's like a manner that makes it feel like shameful.
Right.
you know
Right.
we have to move from that.
Yeah.
And I think the way that our systems are made, obviously, is not only just made out of like exploitation, but you also get punished for it. Like, you
Right.
get punished for doing these things.
Yeah.
And so that's why I find a big issue with the language of how people talk about those who, like you said, are young parents or who use substances, or it's kind of like, what's the root issue? And so it's like, we can address these things and emphasize on it, but the language has to be specific. So if people feel like they can rehabilitate themselves and reintroduce themselves back into the community in a positive manner, and not
Yeah.
just feeling like they're thrown into it, right? And just like, okay, I'm fending for myself, fending for my
Yeah.
own children. And people kind of put this idea of like the perfect helpless person. Like, oh, just poor them, they're just low income and they can't work. It's like, there's no such thing. There's gonna be people addicted, there's
Yeah.
gonna be people who are domestic violence survivors, there's gonna be people who are undocumented. These are the imperfect people that are still worthy of
Yeah.
support and of care, no matter how that looks, right? And this brings me into the point of knowing that on my own lens of things and my own deprogramming of things, what is it that I can do to provide that support, and still evolve my awareness? Because we're always going to be developing more awareness and how we can support one another, because
Yeah.
we're still on earth, right? I call it our earthly,
Right.
like our ego,
Yeah.
ourselves, of like wanting to be righteous and to be morally correct. And that is a constant battle as abolitionists that we're having, is being morally correct, right?
Right.
Such a battle, being like, this is right and this is wrong. And like, actually, the whole purpose of abolition is nuanced and it's complex, and there's no
Right.
one right way.
Right. Right.
That is why when doing this work, you have to build that openness and that like willingness to be wrong, because we're always going to see that imperfect person that's going to probably challenge our own inner thoughts. And
It's a
that's
more
why.
realistic vision. I mean, it's like we I know Mariam Kaba says, like a million different experiments. And I think we need to kind of get back to that mindset a little bit. We've gotten into such a like, there's no gray area. No, like it's mostly gray. I mean, because as you're saying, you just don't know what that person, and this is one of the things I try to do in my practice with people is like, maybe they come to me with neck pain. And then as I start working with them more and more, I find out they're also a rape survivor. They also have like really, a lot of issues in their family, or they've been, they were homeless for 2 years, or you start hearing all these things. This is not just about this person's neck. If I don't
Right.
get that whole story, I don't have any sense of like what sort of support does this person actually need. Sometimes it's in healthcare, and sometimes there's other resources around. Maybe somebody like you who just knows like, all right, this person needs some clothing right now, and then then we figure that part out. You know what I mean? Or they're going for a job interview and they need some clothes for this. There's like
Yep.
so many nuanced ways in which I think we can help people. and we have
Yes.
to get out of this. And this is why I'm so impressed with you today. It's like, you know, how old are you? 25,
I'll be 24 next week.
24. I mean,
Yeah.
I think what a lot of people will do is they'll go kind of head down, like, let's just focus on my career. I'm going to have my kids. I'm going to get my career, in a good place, and then I will help people. And you're just like right out of the gate. You saw the
Oh,
struggle. You figured it out.
I was in the struggle,
I
right?
know.
Like most folks who organize this type of work are a part of the communities they're advocating for.
Yeah.
And I think that lens is so important because we make it seem like you said, once I'm up, I can support. But it's like actually folks who've been doing this work and who've laid that pathway for us years prior were a part of the struggle. And
Yeah.
they were battling things within their communities and were like, wait, hold on, let me do what I can do, right? Like the Black Panther Party, Fannie Lou Hamer, all these phenomenal, profound organizers and activists and leaders were struggling with their people, and
Right.
so it takes that lens to know what needs need to be met.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
agree.
me being a low income Black woman, a Black mother, hearing these statistics like, oh, Black maternal health, you have a 300% higher risk of dying in labor, all of these things. It's like, so what is the answer, right? A doula. Yeah, that's great. But the real answer is that, this system doesn't listen to Black people.
Right.
So we're in labor and we're like, hey, my blood pressure, my heart is racing. I'm hot. I'm sweating. My feet are swollen. Like that is just oh, you're so strong. You can handle this. Right. And then
Yeah.
they unfortunately pass away delivering. Right.
Right.
This is not just oh, you need a doula. This is like, this system needs to listen.
And
And it
and you
needs,
had a health scare, didn't you?
I'm sorry.
And you had a health scare, didn't you?
I did. I fainted during my pregnancy. I was vegan and extremely malnourished. Not saying that those two are
Yeah.
synonymous, but it was definitely just like a need needed to be met and I wasn't meeting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I fainted when I was pregnant and that was extremely horrifying for me. And that also kind of gave me that lens. Had I not had a doula and that extra advocate like voice for me, I probably wouldn't have caught on to the things I needed to do to feel supported because I wanted to have a birth center birth with my first child. And they were like, we can't take you unless you get your iron levels up. You'll have to transfer to a hospital. And those are just like big red flags. So I'm like, I cannot go to a hospital. Like hearing from my elders and from people I care about, like their horrifying traumatic experiences delivering in a hospital, I was like, that just is not an option for me. Right. And
Right.
like, I just knew probably intuitively that I wouldn't feel as advocated for in a hospital.
Yep.
And this is just my own personal experience, but in my own personal feelings, but I just feel like hospital settings usually aren't empowering for people who are
Yeah.
pregnant. Like
Yeah.
it gives a lot of like fear surrounding and like hesitancy. Like you can't, for example, you can't eat when you're in labor just in case you have to have a C-section. But and for me, I'm like, why would you even expect that or prepare for that? Right.
Right.
Like
Right.
I would want to feel empowered in knowing I can do this. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I went the birth center route, because I wanted that advocacy and that empowerment of wanting to deliver in my own personal state and not having to expect or prepare on an
Yeah.
energetic or spiritual level for a cesarean. And
Right.
it's not me saying like, oh, don't have a hospital birth, because what works for folks is going to work for folks.
Yeah.
I want to put that like kind of emphasis that, wanting to get that holistic care and have your own charge and power of your labor and delivery is a little bit more possible in a birth setting or a home birth setting.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm an advocate. I did have my son at home and it was the most magical thing. And I felt so supported and I felt like things were in my own hands, which is why I talk about these things on my platform. I talk
Yeah.
about alternative ways to birth and how to get your mindset ready, how to get your spirit ready, how to get your body ready. These things are so powerful for pregnant people. You want to feel empowered. You don't want to feel discouraged, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that ties into abolition and feeling empowered to do things for yourself, for your family, that'll in turn benefit your community or your neighborhood.
Right.
And it starts in pregnancy. It starts before you even conceive, really. But, if we're talking about vulnerable people in this stage of 9-10 months, months plus the postpartum phase, you really gotta just like focus on what healing looks like for you, and that starts even before you conceive.
Yeah. And
Oh,
it's the thing that I've always struggled with as far as, thinking about how we create support systems, the way that they've been done from a state level, because if you want to, if we just went through this whole rezoning thing in our school district, and I went to the first meeting, and it's like, yes, I see how you want to work on improving test scores, but you're not really looking at what the bigger picture is as far as like the social needs of these communities. They're just completely missing that step. And it really, I mean, my feeling, and I'm sure you feel the same way. It needs to start at that maternal level of bringing that child into the world. I mean, that is where things are either gonna, go right or go wrong.
yep,
And
absolutely.
it's where you start with a healthy foundation, or when you have small kids, it's chaos. So
Oh, yeah.
if you had a horrible pregnancy or delivery or both, and then you have any sort of complications with a baby, and there's many. My daughter had meningitis when she was 12 days old. So
Mm.
I mean, the kinds of things that can really just throw you off. And then depending on what your income level is, that is how we build society. It's like from that's the level. I feel like that's the foundational level.
Yes, those factors play a major part in our parenting styles, our parenting techniques, and our emotional capacity to parent, like from our finances to the way we birth. Like
Yeah,
birth trauma is real, postpartum, that period is real, and it can cause a lot of damage to families who haven't felt that support and care
right.
and feeling like they were acknowledged, right? Because yes, the baby matters, but so does mom, so does parent. They have a you know, remarkable part into how this human is going to raise themselves.
Yeah,
And so when they don't feel like their needs are being met, what does that cause, right? For our test levels, for our children to develop interpersonal relationships,
right.
for our children to be into the community. Those things are so impactful. And I
Yeah,
think that doing this work with families has just kept reiterating for me how, yes, it does start during pregnancy, postpartum, like those vulnerable moments will definitely steer the trajectory of that child and that parent's life and the
yeah,
family's life too.
yeah.
And so I think that's why it's so easy for me to be hard on myself and say I'm not doing enough, like there's so much that needs to be done. And I'm learning to not listen to that. That's the devil. I am not listening
Yeah.
to that anymore because it's truly not, it's not correct. The small things,
Are you talking
and I
about as a parent?
as a parent, and as an organizer, right? Because I'm
Yeah,
parenting while I organize and while I do community work, yes. And I think that's my superpower. I was at what do you call that? It was like a learning session with the Minnesota Freedom Fund last night, and one of the questions were, "What's your superpower?" And I said, "You know what? Mine is mothering while I do community work
yeah,
because that is something that is always a hard balance. I know you know what I mean as a
yeah,
parent and as someone who's trying to do work for families and work for people. It can be very murky. It can be very
yeah.
confusing to see like your identity within this work, and separate that. And so for me, constantly dealing with that is fun, but it's also stressful at times. And
Right.
setting boundaries with myself as a parent and also as a organizer and a community worker is a lifelong thing, I would say. I
Yeah,
don't
you
think
got
I'll
to you got to protect your own energy in this situation, because there's a lot of demands on you, and trying to figure out how to also keep you well in the mix is
right.
challenging. It goes along with almost all caregivers, I think. And I kind
Absolutely.
of think about your work and even Jason's work as being, kind of a caregiving type of work.
Oh
It's a
yeah.
it's a even organizing in general. I mean, there's being at that sort of management level of a project. It's like there's so many different things going on that you have to be mindful of at all times. And also you're dealing with a lot of different personalities, and that's a lot to balance.
Yes. And most of the time you don't get rewarded for it, or you
No,
don't get any
nope.
type of like people think it's like a income worthy type of thing. And I'm a very open book about things. Like you don't get much compensation
Right.
taking care of your community, it's really about the willingness in your heart and the compassion and the intentions that you have for a liberated world that's going to keep you going. Not the money,
Oh,
not the acknowledgement, and yeah, not the sustainability. It's just like a part of the work, right? So I think you're right. This is a caregiving role in its own default because you are providing for others. You're responsible for taking care of them and relieving issues, whether on a social, political level or a physical, tangible level.
yeah.
So I think that definitely it'll be hard to balance the two. It's not impossible, but it definitely is more sacrificial than it is like a mutual thing. But
But
that's why I also do promote mutual aid because I
well,
do
that's it.
see a way to get relief
Right.
as an organizer and stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting. Have you seen that documentary with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu?
No, but I've heard,
It's called Mission Joy. And
yeah,
you just reminded me, I just saw it last weekend. One of the things that they get to, with talking about really trying to figure out where joy comes from, because they've both been through such tough lives, in many ways. And at the same time, that what they kind of both figured, for themselves, was that the joy came from knowing that they could have a place where they could help people in the world, that
yeah,
that it was really, when it comes to, all these things that we're really looking for, thinking we can get joy from, whether it's like material things or an accomplishment or career success, whatever it is, it doesn't really give us, it gives us very little of that actual, that and I think about it as it's like this contentment under the joy. It's like, with the joy are these fleeting moments, but that contentment of feeling good about who you, and solid about who you are as a person, is
mm,
really what carries, the energy too.
absolutely. I 100% agree. My sister has a housing company. She's a registered nurse and she houses disabled folks. So those who have any disability that's verified through like state governmental measures, she provides housing for them,
Mm,
um, and services. So I've been working closely with her for about 7 months now with housing disabled people here in the Twin Cities. And oh man, has this been humbling for me.
I bet.
I'm going to share actually a story that just recently happened. So a client of ours, he has I don't know what type of waiver he's on and what type of disability he exactly has. He has his own autonomy. However, one of his things is that he's pretty gullible. I don't know what
Mm,
that is under like disability things, but like he's very easily persuaded.
yeah.
And so we were at a store and I was away from him for like 2 minutes. And he calls me and he's like, "Hey, I'm at the electronics section." I'm like, "Why are you at the electronics section?" So I get there and one of the representative, like the teller people, were doing their marketing sales of getting folks to get a new phone plan with them. And
Mm,
so he was thinking it was so cool. So he like canceled his whole phone plan and just signed up, right? And for me, I was like, I kept asking him, I'm like, "Are you sure you want to do this? They're saying that it's going to be cheaper, but we're looking at the paperwork that he's signing and it's actually not."
uh,
And so I was like, "Okay, are you sure?" He was so sure. And he had his own autonomy and his own choice and decision.
mm-hmm,
And so as support staff or a support worker, I just had to say, okay, I can't force him to do anything. I can't force anything. And that moment for me was just very humbling because it puts a lens on the fact that, disabled folks have autonomy and they have rights and they have
yeah,
choice
yeah,
and they can speak up for themselves. And so because they can do that, even though someone might say, "Hey, this might be a better alternative or a better route," like they still have that voice and we have to respect it.
yeah,
And it gave me such another perspective into this movement that like people have the right and the autonomy and the choice. no matter what it looks like to us, no matter how right or wrong on a moral basis it may
Right.
be,
Yeah.
they have that choice. And so for me, it was just like another thing, right? Like in this movement, we always have that, oh, right,
Yeah.
and that was that for me. And just understanding that here in this community work, we are here to support each other in the decisions that we have. And here comes the nuance to that,
Yeah.
because sometimes I don't agree.
Right.
And sometimes I feel like I might know what might be best for you, but I can't give that choice for you, no
Right.
matter what my experience is or my expertise is. Like I don't have say only in my own decisions and my own response to this life.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that was so humbling for me. It was just humbling. I
I
still hard, but it was humbling.
I mean, even people who we wouldn't consider to be, have a disabled label
Right.
are depending on what our background is and what our, our traumas in our past, or, whatever things have happened to us. And sometimes, I work with a lot of people who have had traumatic brain injuries where it's not really clear exactly what's going on with them.
Yep.
Sometimes it just seems like a memory issue, or there's an emotional, surge that happens once in a while. It's really hard to gauge these things. But to me, it's the same kind of humbling thing that's happened for me. I see myself in them a lot of times where I'm like, oh, I know when I make, bad decisions based on these kinds of things
Yes.
too. And again, it goes back to that whole judgment thing. And it's a lot of what I feel like I've learned about myself through the abolition work is like, I've had a lot of judgments about different kinds of things, even though I've lived in very diverse communities, like I still find myself like in so many different ways. Sometimes it's about a younger person. Sometimes it's about, a bad choice that I just think they made, but not really willing to kind of sit with that and be like, they have to go through this. I mean, I'm dealing with it as a parent now,
Yeah, with teenagers, right?
right. But I think the more that you give to them to make those decisions, that really the better decision makers they become too. So you have to let those things happen.
Yes. And it's such a battle, right? Like I think that we see abolition practices as something that you have to like do profoundly, like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. But it's actually like little things like that, like letting them have the choice and the freedom and supporting and loving them through those choices and freedoms. Like
Yeah.
that is abolition. That is a practice. That is a lens and a framework. And a lot of us can get caught up in the language on social media of like,
Right.
this is what it looks like to be an abolitionist. You must do this. And it's like, really, it's about the habits and the behavior and the language that you're doing to the people who you are in your loved circle right now, and how you're treating them to have them feel like they're feeling loved by you in an not unconditional, because love has conditions, but in a way that is I guess full spectrum. I
Yep.
love a full
Yeah.
spectrum. Like, even
Yeah.
though I don't agree with you, I love you and I'm here. And I won't make you feel bad or feel like you can't access me in a way because I don't agree.
Right.
And, I think that is going to be a forever battle. I'm always battling with that inside of like morality and ego and judgment in this field of abolition. But that's important. I have to have that battle
Right.
because that's how I work through it. And I always say this, like, I'm problematic. We all are. We all have
Right.
problematic
Right.
things. And
Right.
that's okay. If we're going to be within each other's faces and neighborhoods and communities, like, we've got to be like, someone's going to have a hot take we don't agree with. Someone's going to have
Yep.
the way that they live that we don't agree with. And if we don't like come to this realization now, we're going to have this consistent black and white cancel culture type of thing. And I'm
Right.
just not with that for our abolition movement. I
Right.
don't think that's causing any liberation. And I don't think that brings any unity. Like,
Right.
expect people to be problematic. Folks are coming from environments that are like unexplainable. Seriously. Like, we don't see it maybe personally or with our own eyes, but these things shape folks' mindsets and survival.
Yeah.
And so we have to move with love and with patience and with grace. Or else how are we going to liberate each other,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, and I just recently, I was just thinking, I don't know if I read something that triggered this or what it was, but something about like cancel culture in some ways we've had many points in history probably, but I was thinking about the fact that like Jim Crow on some level was like the beginning of it was the beginning of the industrial prison complex. That was really the changeover that started to happen. And whereas I think before that we had some jails and we had things going on, and the idea of rehabilitation was sort of like in the mix, like, okay, we got this guy in the community, and it's when communities were smaller, right? We got this guy in the community. He's got a drinking problem. We got to keep throwing him in the pen, and he becomes like a comical character almost for the community. It wasn't such a big deal. And then suddenly with Jim Crow, we started having these things where it's like, let's just make that disappear. Like we don't even want to see that anymore, which I mean, I think has led, full to where we are today, which is where people can't make a mistake without being canceled. And if you're a Black or brown skinned person, it's even quicker. You're way more vulnerable in any given situation. And that's kind of where I feel like, we have to take back some of this, and a lot of these things that I'm talking about, they happen for, reasons that we can sort of identify in some ways, but also reasons that are just like driven by greed and business interest and all these things too. So, I mean, I think part of what abolition does is it actually cancels out some of that aspect of where moneyed interests can infiltrate.
Yes.
And I think we have to be careful with it in some ways, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that having that punishment approach to things is why we have children who continue to mimic behaviors that might not be positive and then hurt other children and hurt other people, and then grow up to be in a society where they think harm is a cyclical thing that's normal. And that's why, with families who live on the north side or who live in environments that are always being just abused on so many different governmental levels and stuff, is that we tend to forget that these behaviors are severely impacting our youth in ways that we don't even notice until we start to see news headlines and statistics and all these things. And I think one of my favorite things I just recently read was that, Black women are usually blamed as mothers for the reason why their children have behavioral issues. But for white women and white mothers, it's kind of like, oh, that's just a happening. I don't know how.
It's happening chemically in their body
it's
somehow.
A chemical imbalance, right? Yeah, or like they have a historical genetic thing, right? Whatever it may be. But for us, like, we get the brunt end of the reason why violence and crime and all these things are happening in our communities. It's the Black mother's fault for not doing whatever it may be. Right. And let me say this. I don't think that Black mothers do not have a role somehow in their children's behaviors. However, I do think that the factors that play into the environments that a lot of Black mothers are in is the reason why their children make these choices and behaviors because of where they are. Because of the survival mode that many parents and families have to be in. And so, because I always try and say, like, I never make excuses for people. There is a reason why, and those reasons why can give us a way of prevention and stopping shit in its tracks. Oh, excuse my language.
That's all right.
But because I get very sensitive about these things.
I hear you.
These babies don't have a lot of freedom to absorb this information. They don't have a choice to say, you know what, I'm not listening to that. They are put in these environments by their own will, without, whatever. And so for me, it's just been, how can I get to the root of these? Which is why we created our parenting through Parenting with Safety program, because we're trying to get to the root. Like, if you're going to choose to parent in this environment with these decisions that you're making, how can you do it with a safety plan and with intentions that provide care and attention to your children and to yourself, so
Yeah.
that although you're choosing this, you can feel supported, that should anything happen, you know who you can rely on, and you know what you can do alternatively, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
Because people are going to choose to do what they want to do as parents, whether they got babies or not. But like,
Yeah.
we have to make sure that they have these options of support to continue to have their children be looked after, no matter what.
And
And that,
and it's some accountability. I mean, it seems like I was just reading through some of the stuff on your website with so for any I'll have all this stuff in the show notes for anyone who wants to check out Seeds Worth Sowing, your nonprofit. But one of the things I saw was that you're going to start offering some consulting, and I feel like it's almost kind of like this advocacy that needs to happen, like you're saying. I have we have my daughter has some friends with single parents right now, and I can because and I grew up single parent, so I'm very tuned into like this parent has no one to talk to about these decisions, and they're making some bad decisions sometimes, and to be able to just be there and say, what are you having trouble with right now? Is there anything we can help you with? Do you need a night off?
right.
Whatever it is. Those are
Absolutely.
the kinds of things that need to happen.
Yes, they are. And without feeling like we have to be all in their business,
Right.
without them wanting to disclose. Like if we approach it in a way that obviously you see that we care and we want to see you happy and we want to see you parenting with joy, that should make you feel comfortable, right? To share what you want to share. But you don't want to do it in a forceful manner that makes it seem like we can't help you unless you tell us what's going on and you give
Right.
us proof.
Yeah.
Right? Like a lot of folks want proof. Like, show me that you're struggling. Show me that
Yep.
you're going through these
Right.
things, right? And that's
Right.
its own problematic process on itself, right? And that's actually why I even started this work, because when I was trying to get support from the government, they wanted me to show them that I was
Yeah.
struggling and show them that I needed all this help. And I was like,
You're like the
I'm
bags
gonna do
under my
it
eyes.
because I'm in survival mode, but
Yeah.
this should not be the normal standard of how people get.
It's terrible.
Yeah, but that's very true, that the consulting that we provide is we call it the root of issues, right? To get to the root of the issue, like what is it beyond the physical things that you are going through that you need support in?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, how does that look like for you? Because it's different for everyone.
What kinds of
And
things do you tend to see with, or expect to see, with people, or from your own experience, that are those root issues?
so the root issues we're finding is folks don't have stable housing.
Yeah.
Folks don't have a family like support system to rely on to care for their children when they need that break or when they need additional help.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks don't feel safe to ask for help because they are undocumented.
Mhm.
So those are the root issues we're kind of identifying that we notice with the clients that we see. And we that's why we also emphasize when we're meeting with people, like, this is confidential,
Mhm.
and nothing's going to be sold or sent to or shared with anyone outside of our organization,
Yeah.
because being undocumented, right? Or like being a survivor of some way, or dealing with a restraining order, and like you have a high profile job that you don't want people to know about.
Yeah.
Those things are very, very important for the clients that we support. So we've found that those are the main patterns, but it varies a lot.
Yeah. And this is maybe a little bit of an aside, but are you still, I know you were pushing into trying to create a CSA, your farmer as well.
Yes. So we are definitely still trying to, well, right now we're on break for the CSA. We do provide like consulting and workshops to folks who are aspiring to farm and do rural living. But we're actually in like the process of trying to get our own land. We were like doing it on my mom's land. But we're trying to get
Where
our,
was that?
it
Or
was
where's
in
her land?
Willow River. And so
Where's that?
Willow River is like you're going to Duluth,
Okay.
but not that far.
Okay.
But it's on 35.
It's
So
on.
like
Okay.
it kind of, yeah, like if you're going up to Duluth, it's like one of the stops or the exits before that.
Okay. Yeah.
About an hour, I'd say an hour and 15 minutes
Okay.
away.
Okay.
Mhm.
Have you ever done anything with urban farming?
No, I've always farmed rurally. That's just what I know.
Yeah,
But actually, let me take that back. When I was younger, my mom did do a lot of like the pioneering for like urban farms and stuff in the
yeah,
north side. She had this program called the Northside Food Project when I was a kid, and it was a project of having allowing farms to be in the urban areas where there was like nothing going on the land,
yeah.
and allowing folks to be able to grow food and grow produce and like market it as well. So she was a part of that when I was a kid, and so we did a lot of urban farming then, but that's my only experience with urban farming. A lot of my farming is simply rural. Being on beautiful, luscious land that hasn't been touched and sprayed and
Yeah,
chemically, drained with things, and growing produce and having chickens. We had some goats, but we didn't use them for any reason. We just had chickens for eggs, and then
yeah.
we had peppers and tomatoes. And so we're hoping to blend those with the work that I do with my families, because the land that we're wanting has some homes on there. And so we would love to provide housing
Ah,
care for in exchange of like helping us grow and, being a part of that like ecosystem
I
of
like
village,
it.
growing our own food and preserving. Yeah. So that's my other big dream.
That's cool. Do your kids like it?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. My children love it. I feel like what baby does it? Like what children
It's
don't love to
true.
be
Get,
feet in the grass
yep,
and feeling the sun and petting animals and feeling what it's like to have soil in your hands.
yep, yep, for
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
Circling back around to the maternal care stuff, do you have any I can't remember if there's anything on your website that are links to, for like, I mean, I would, one of the things that I want to talk to you about eventually at some point too is I've been thinking, well, a lot of the networks that I like to build are for support and especially for more kind of vulnerable populations. So we'll get together at some point and kind of talk about how to work on some getting some bridges built with that. But do you have any links, anything like that on your website as far as like Black and brown maternal care is concerned?
Um, so I have a doula that I suggest anyone who is looking for one from
Yeah.
me.
Okay.
I suggest that doula. Their name is Nadine. Pronouns are they, them. They are a phenomenal full spectrum doula,
Cool.
and they provide pre, post, and I think a little bit after, if I'm correct.
Okay.
So yeah, I recommend that for doula support. Any birth working information or birth advocacy things that people want to know, especially about home birthing
Yep.
or like alternative birthing methods, they can always just personally reach out to me.
Okay, cool.
I do just free consulting for any families that want to learn more, even for fathers who want to learn how to support their partners and doing
Yes.
home birth, because that can be nerve-wracking for many, right? Like seeing some people even do free births where they don't have a midwife and they don't have a doula. Like they just do it
Hmm.
with their partner and in their home and they just do it.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so if folks are interested in learning more about like how they can engage with the advocacy and the awareness of maternal things, they can obviously follow my Instagram. I share a lot of information on like the newest statistics and new ways to support and all these things. And I suggest if you have a pregnant person in your life right now, um, if they have a doula fund or if they have a postpartum fund, donate to that, give them funding for that, because that's going to be a big part of them feeling like they have their support team.
Yeah. And I'm going to be, and yeah, as you know, I'm doing a whole series of stuff on maternal care and birthing, and I have a birthing education person coming on. I've got a couple of midwives, some people who kind of work around different aspects of maternal care, and I'm working on